Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be discussing my take on Prime Minister's questions, as Starmer mostly focused on the damage being done by the government on workers' pay, and Blackford drew international comparisons with the economy. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So following on from the video I published earlier today, which included the reports that Boris Johnson has been trying to abuse his position for years to get his wife a cushy, well-paid job using public money for roles that don't even exist, much less for which she is qualified. The first question of the session was from Labour MP Chris Elmore and asked if the Prime Minister has ever considered the appointment of his current wife to a government post or a post within the royal household. Note the careful nature of the question. Elmore wasn't asking if the reports in the Times that have been retracted now or the Mirror were true. He's not even asking if Johnson has tried to formally get such a job for Carrie Johnson. He asked the general question about whether he'd even considered it. Boris Johnson didn't answer the question. He responded by saying, no, the opposition don't want to talk about the economy or the number of people in payroll employment. Notice he's not calling it work anymore. He's not saying the number of people in work because that lie's been debunked so many times. So he's now talking about payroll employment to hide the fact that there are fewer people in work than before the pandemic. But the key point is that the question wasn't answered. As it's not a matter of national security, and the answer to any question of any government minister of this sort should always be no. Of course I haven't corruptly tried to get a job using public money for my wife. And given that he has denied things falsely in the past, even in the House of Commons, I think we can assume two things. First, it's absolutely true. That's all there is to it. He wouldn't deny it, so it's true. If not true, why not deny it? Simplest thing in the world. Secondly, that Johnson knows that there's clear proof that he cannot now hide. So there's no point in denying it because the truth would come out immediately. But then on to Keir Starmer's questions. And he said, Ian Starmer then. Ian Blackford, Keir Starmer. It's too hot today. But we've got a couple of by-elections coming up tomorrow. They're both important, and they're both important to everyone connected to politics. But Labour's main focus is, of course, the red wall seat of Wakefield. Starmer expressed sympathy for the Tory candidate, who's been attacked by Conservative MPs for his Brexit stance and who've refused to help him campaign. It's been quite extraordinary. Labour have been sending wave after wave after wave of MPs to Wakefield for weeks. Starmer's been like 2 or 3 times now. Boris Johnson not gone at all. And even Tory MPs are refusing to campaign for this by-election. And Starmer asked if Johnson's even interested to see if the people will vote for a Tory if even his own colleagues don't think he's up to it. Then Johnson just said that he thinks that people in Wakefield, as well as Tiverton and Honiton, the seat that the Lib Dems are going for tomorrow, would rather vote for a Conservative government. Well, they both did in 2019, didn't they? So I wonder what he'll have to say if they change their minds tomorrow. The next question was regarding the rail strikes, and indeed this is where the questions went from here. Strikes that could turn into a bit of a movement this summer. Lots of sectors looking at industrial action, including civil servants and barristers, which are not exactly hotbeds of lefty wokeism, are they? Starmer said that Transport Secretary Grant Shapps spends his time tracking the Prime Minister's unpopularity on his spreadsheet instead of dealing with the travel problems. He asked how many meetings the Prime Minister or the Transport Secretary had been with rail workers in order to avert the strikes. Johnson responded, not by answering the question, of course, but by saying, oh, my government loves railways. Choo-choo and all that. He didn't actually say that. But he did say, I built Crossrail, which is not actually true, and that he's going to build the Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is also not true because he's already cut the funding for that. He then tried to make something of the Labour MPs on the picket lines yesterday. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the minor details, but these questions can be best summarised as follows. So the government are trying to use the strikes to distract from their own economic mismanagement and to claim that the country would be worse under Labour. They're trying to suggest that these strikes are a sign of what would be the case under a Labour government. It's like, well, they're happening under a Tory government though, aren't they? And also, there's no rail strikes in Wales. Wales has got a Labour government. So if this sort of thing is what you get with the Labour government, how come we haven't got one in Wales? Because the Labour government got involved there. They did go to meetings. They did work to avert these strikes. I do wish Starmer had mentioned that as well, but I don't think he did, unless I missed it. He did, however, point out that it is the Conservatives that are in government, and it's they with the power to sort it out. Because during one exchange, Starmer responded to a barb from Johnson about his MPs defying orders to be on the picket line by saying to the Prime Minister, if I need advice about, say a £100,000 job at the Foreign Office, then I'll ask the Prime Minister. But he also noted that the PM had not bothered to meet the rail unions, but that he sold himself off on Monday, because this refers to a fundraiser, Tory fundraiser, where Boris Johnson auctioned himself off to the highest bidder. The winner is paying £120,000 for a private dinner with Boris Johnson. Now, what sort of return do you suppose they want out of that? Because this is how it works. The Conservatives say, you're backing these strikes because you're in the employ of the unions give you money. Even though the union striking right now is not affiliated to Labour and gives them no money. It may fund the odd MP here and there, but that's a separate donation. So if you want to compare union funding of Labour, which doesn't apply to the current union striking, as I say, and which, because they're not affiliated with Labour, and how the Tories are funded, well, union funding for Labour is just that. It's all out in the open. If a union doesn't think it wants to donate as much anymore, it doesn't have to, like Unite did recently. But it's not a bidding process for the attention of the Labour leader. And all these unions do is lobby for their workers. Sometimes they're clever and pragmatic about it, sometimes not so much. But it's all motivated by getting good paying conditions for ordinary workers. But the Tories are funded by a range of individuals, 100% of whom are interested only in their own narrow commercial interests. So it's like funding for the Labour Party by unions, which represents tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of members. Funding for the Conservative Party by an individual who just wants a return for themselves. Sometimes it's political interest, not commercial, in the case of money that's been funneled into the party from those linked to the Russian government, for example. Nothing open about it in either case. We do not know what they want until they get it, often in the form of lucrative government contracts. Sometimes it's years before we know what they wanted. But anyway, the main thrust from Starmer was that Johnson just blames everyone else for the problems. He's ignoring the country who are screaming at him to get on with the job. He said that the Treasury is arguing for every worker to get a pay cut, every single one, which they are, but that the government are trying to change the rules to allow bankers to get even bigger bonuses. This is related to the rules harking back to the great greed-fueled global crash of 14 years ago. Pay rises for city bankers, pay cuts for district nurses. I didn't see that on the leaflets in Wakefield, Starmer said. Johnson also tried to claim that the economy is prospering thanks to his leadership. Well, I'm glad he says the state of the economy is down to him, but it's hardly prospering, is it? If it were, we'd be enjoying wage growth and low inflation, not the other way around. Starmer ended by saying that Johnson finds time to have meetings with bankers to end the cap on their bonuses, but not for meetings to end the rail strike. He ended by noting that members of the armed forces are also facing a pay cut. And Johnson fired back with a list of things he thinks are going well, and that while he's doing this, Labour MPs are literally holding hands with Arthur Scargill. Just a couple of curious things about this statement. As someone else pointed out before me, if he's got to go all the way back to a union leader from the 1980s to find someone to bash, he's getting a bit desperate. Second, it's a common Tory trick to persuade people that they are governing by listing a load of initiatives, because usually it works on the basis that these initiatives are to help the poor, so that the normal working class, middle class and upper working class, whatever you want to call it, voters think they don't have to feel guilty about voting Tory because they know the Tory are the nasty party. And I think some people, they think that the Tory party will do better for them. They think that. They never look at the economic data. But they don't want to feel guilty that they're abandoning people in genuine poverty. So the government reels off a list of initiatives that make out that they're actually helping them. And anyone that seems to be suffering is just a scrounger. The problem is, it doesn't work when the people who are supposed to be benefiting from these initiatives can see that they're not. Because they rarely do. Because the bottom line is, we're not talking about just the poorest in society that are suffering now. Ordinary voters are struggling. The Tory strategy seems to be to convince people that it's not to get rid of the problems. It's not to try and work and to get rid of the problems. The strategy is to maintain the problems and convince people it is the fault of the party that's been in opposition for 12 years, not the party who've been in government all that time. And this is why Starmer was pushing this line so hard about Johnson just blaming everyone else and pointing out, you're the one in government, not us. You know, because this is a strategy that for Tories has worked. It worked when Labour had only just lost power. It's a bit of a stretch to suppose it'll work now. But that is their strategy, so we'll just have to see. But then Ian Blackford of the SNP had some questions on the economy. He asked why the UK is doing worse than other European economies. Johnson insisted that the inflation was a global problem. He also said taxes are higher in Scotland. Maybe, but the public services are better, and satisfaction with the government is also higher, a lot higher. Unfortunately, Blackford, himself under pressure for appearing to shield a sex-offending colleague, didn't say that. He did cite the recent report from the Resolution Foundation, as he often does when a new one is out, and which I'll be covering at some point, showing how Brexit has made the UK poorer. He asked if the Prime Minister would negotiate an agreement with the EU, or is he going to push us into recession? Naturally, Blackford knew how Johnson's going to respond to this. Full-on jingoistic, we're doing great with Brexit and the world is keen to trade with us nonsense. But that didn't matter. Blackford cites a report saying Brexit is making us poorer, right? Johnson denies this is the case. So what do voters think? Do they feel that things are going all right, or do they feel poorer? I suspect I know the answer. I think Blackford does too. But those are essentially the main battle lines drawn for this summer spread across the two opposition leaders there. The prospect for major industrial action as the Tories are digging in. Ken Clarke, you may think he's a relatively moderate Tory, and so he is, but he's still a Tory. He insisted that the government must win this battle or other workers will demand pay rises. Yeah, that's what we want, isn't it? That people should be able to get pay rises so they can afford the cost of living. And the economic impact of this government is being noticed by people. People in this country do sometimes vote to be poorer. By accident, they don't mean to. It's because the Tory media persuade them. But they do that. But I think it's very rare for people to want to vote for actual poverty. I'm not sure the Tories have got the right strategy here. I'm not convinced Labour are being bold enough either. But I do think the Tories are adopting a highly unrealistic strategy in hoping that people will vote for the government that brought them the poverty and blaming it on the opposition. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.